Let me ask you something. What if the only thing standing between you and the life you dream of is not talent, not luck, not connections, but simply what you choose to do every single day? Not once, not when you feel like it, not when the sky is clear and the wind is at your back, but every day, even when your hands are cracked and bleeding, even when no one is watching, even when the results seem invisible and the world tells you to stop. Because here is the truth that most people never discover. The extraordinary life is not built in moments of inspiration. It is built in the quiet, unglamorous, repetitive discipline of showing up again and again when everything in you wants to quit. This is the story of a young farmer who learned that lesson the hardest way possible, and it will change the way you see your own life forever. There is a village tucked between two low hills in the countryside, the kind of place where the morning mist sits heavy over the fields until the sun burns it away, and where the smell of rain on dry earth is the closest thing people know to perfection. In this village, most families survived on what they could grow. The soil was unforgiving, cracked in summer, flooded in the rainy months, and stubborn all year round. Generations had worked it with nothing but ox-drawn plows, tired hands, and prayers whispered at dusk. Among the young men of this village, there was one who burned differently. He was the son of a farmer who had died young, leaving behind a small plot of land, a worn-out hoe, and a family that depended entirely on the older boy to survive. His two younger sisters attended the village school. His mother's health was fragile, and the weight of all of it rested on his young shoulders like a stone yoke. Every morning before sunrise, he rose from a straw mat on the earthen floor, splashed water on his face from a clay pot, and walked the dusty path to the fields. He watched the other young men in the village sleep late, gather at the market stalls, laugh loudly by the river in the afternoons. And sometimes, in the hollow space beneath his ribs, he felt the sting of it. He was working every day. And yet, the harvest was never enough. The rains came too early one season, rotting half the crop before it could be picked. A drought followed. The ox fell sick. A creditor came to the door of their small mud brick home with cold eyes and a folded piece of paper. And so he did what exhausted, desperate young men sometimes do. He stopped. Not completely. He still went to the fields, but the fire had gone out of him. He moved slowly. He skipped the early mornings. He began to tell himself the story that the land was cursed, that his family was unlucky, that no matter how hard he worked, the outcome would always be the same. He had confused motion with discipline. He had confused effort with consistency. And there is a profound difference between the two. There was an old villager who lived near the bend of the river. He was ancient, the kind of old that made children fall quiet and adults speak respectfully. He had outlived 2 wives, a drought that killed half the village's livestock, and decades of hardship that would have broken iron. But his small farm, all these years later, was the most productive in the region. Not the largest, not the most modern, but the most consistent. Every season, without fail, his fields yielded well. Traders came from 2 valleys away to buy his grain. One evening, the young farmer found himself sitting near the river, throwing stones into the dark water, too tired to go home, too defeated to feel anything clearly. The old man appeared on the path, walking slowly with a carved wooden stick. He stopped and looked at the young man for a long moment. "You farm the Kwesu plot," the old man said. It was not a question. "Yes, I've watched you," the old man said, lowering himself onto a flat stone beside the water. "You work hard when the pain is fresh. Then you slow down when it fades. Then the pain comes again, and you work hard again." The young farmer said nothing because the words were true. "That is not farming," the old man said quietly. "That is reacting. A man who only plants when he is desperate will always harvest too little, too late." He picked up a small stone and turned it in his weathered fingers. "Do you know why my fields do not fail?" he asked. The young farmer shook his head. "Because I do not ask them to reward me every day. I ask only one thing of myself every day, to do the next right thing. Water the seedlings, clear the weeds, mend the fence post. One thing, every day, without negotiation." He placed the stone gently in the young farmer's palm. "Consistency," the old man said. is not what you do when you are motivated. It is what you do when motivation has left, and only your decision remains. He stood slowly, turned, and walked back up the path toward home. The young farmer sat by the river for a long time, turning that small stone over and over in his hand. He went home that night and did not sleep well. But when the sky outside the single window of their home began to pale before dawn, he rose. Not because he felt like it. He did not feel like it. He rose because he had decided. He made a simple rule for himself, written in charcoal on the inside wall of the tool shed where only he could see it. One thing, every day, no exceptions. That morning, he repaired the crumbling wall of the irrigation channel he had been ignoring for weeks. The next morning, he was up before the mist had lifted, turning compost into the tired eastern section of the field. The morning after that, he replanted a section that had flooded, choosing a more resilient seed variety he had traded for at the weekly market. Some mornings the work was small. Some mornings it felt pointless. Twice in the first month he woke up sick and still dragged himself out to do something, even just 30 minutes of weeding before resting. He stopped measuring success by the harvest. He began measuring it by the consistency of the action. The weeks turned. The field began to look different, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that a wall looks different after 100 bricks have been laid, slowly, structurally, permanently. He began sleeping earlier so he could rise earlier. He stopped going to the market stalls to pass time and instead spent those hours studying the soil, talking to experienced farmers in neighboring plots, reading a battered agricultural pamphlet he had found tucked behind sacks at the supply store. He became, without realizing it, a student of his own land, and the land's stubborn, difficult, cracked old land that it was began to respond. 18 months after that conversation by the river, the harvest came. Not a miracle, not an overnight transformation, but something more powerful than either of those things. A result, earned, accumulated, built one disciplined morning at a time. His yield that season was the best the Kwesu plot had seen in 2 generations. Traders stopped at his gate. His mother, who had grown used to a life measured in scarcity, stood at the edge of the field and pressed both hands to her face and wept quietly. His younger sisters stayed in school. The creditor did not return. And that evening, as the sun dropped behind the low hills and turned the fields the color of warm copper, the young farmer walked to the river bend. The old man was sitting there already, as if he had been expecting him. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while. Then the young farmer said, "It wasn't the soil that was broken." The old man smiled and said nothing. "It was me," the young farmer continued. "I was waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel inspired, waiting for the right season. But the right season comes for the man who prepared the right soil every day, whether he felt like it or not." The old man nodded once. "Now you are a farmer," he said. "Here is what this story is really about. It is not about farming. It is about you. Every single person watching this right now has a field that is waiting, a dream that is sitting in dry soil, a goal that has felt impossible, a version of yourself that you keep putting off until the conditions are better, until you feel more ready, until life gives you a sign. But the sign is already here. It has always been here. The extraordinary does not come from one great effort. It comes from 10,000 small ones. Discipline is not a feeling. Motivation is not a muscle. They're both choices made in the quiet dark of an early morning before anyone else is awake. Made in the middle of exhaustion when everything logical says stop. Made in the space between who you are and who you have decided to become. You do not need perfect conditions. You do not need a perfect plan. You need one thing. Every day. No exceptions. That is the whole secret. Not louder effort, not bigger dreams. Just consistent, relentless, daily action compounding quietly beneath the surface like roots in the dark until the day comes when the world can finally see what you have been building all along. That day will come. But only if you show up tomorrow morning. Will you? We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. Aristotle.